Good afternoon. Apologies for all those watching at home. We're suffering from technical difficulties, so we're starting the meeting again. Welcome everyone to meeting number 210 of the Planning Committee. This evening we have with us Councillor Anthony Aiken, Councillor Ron Nelson, Councillor Bruce Harwood, Councillor Pat Manane, Mayor Councillor Stephanie Asher, and myself, Chair, Councillor Trent Sullivan. We have us with us this evening, officers, Joanne Van Slagman, Manager, City Development, John Rush, Coordinator, Statutory Planning, Shane Pritchard, Team Leader, Statutory Planning, and Lewis Muston, Senior Statutory Planner. The procedure for hearing items this evening will be: the officers will present a brief summary of the written report to the committee. The panel may ask questions of the officers. The panel will then further discuss the application and make a decision. The decision of this panel is the final decision of council acting under delegated authority. If anyone is aggrieved by the decision of this committee, they may appeal to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal in Melbourne. Our staff can assist with this process during office hours. We have apologies this evening from Councillors Grisbeck, Mansfield, Murphy and Contell. For confirmation of minutes from the last meeting, dated 25th of June 2020, can I please have a mover? Councillor Aiken, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Murnane. This evening, the matter for consideration is on PP 1371-2019 for Taylor's Court, Highton. We received 26 objections for this application. No submitters wish to appear before us this evening, so we will not be hearing from the applicant in response either. Officer Muston, if you please.
Thank you, Chair. So 4 Taylor Court is situated to the northern side of Taylor Court. It's an irregular lot, and it has a total, irregularly shaped lot, I should say, and it has a total area of just under 2,300 square metres. The site's frontage to Taylor Court is approximately 12.2 metres. That's within its southwestern corner. The site is provided with vehicular access via an existing double crossover from Taylor Court within that southwestern corner. And it's noted that that double crossover also provides access to the neighbouring dwelling at number 5 Taylor Court as well. There are 2 existing drainage easements to the western side of the site. These easements run parallel to the western site boundary from the site's Taylor Court frontage to its rear boundary at the northern side. The surrounding area is an established residential area of Highton. The site is situated a minimum of 60 metres to the local shops and services within Highton Village, and it's approximately 150 metres to the core of the Highton Village. Highton Village itself being identified as a neighbourhood centre under the city's retail activity centre hierarchy. Nearby services include a mixture of primary schools, high schools, public open space, obviously the shops and services within Highton Village, and also there's also access to bus routes along Roslyn Road, which provide connectivity to the wider municipality as well. In terms of planning controls, 4 Taylor Court is situated within the residential growth zone, and that's Schedule 2 to the residential growth zone. The western side of the site is subject to a special building overlay, and the land to the immediate north and further east of the site is zoned General Residential Zone, Schedule 2, and is also within a Design and Development Overlay, Schedule 14. At the western end of Taylor Court, approximately 60 metres from the subject site, is the Commercial 1 zone, which forms that Highton neighbourhood centre. In terms of the proposal, this application seeks a planning permit for the construction of 9 dwellings and a 9-lot subdivision. The proposal consists of the construction of 3 2-storey and 6 3-storey dwellings. It is proposed to subdivide the site into 9 lots corresponding to the proposed dwellings. The existing vehicle crossover would be retained and upgraded, and a proposed common property access way running parallel to the western side boundary would serve each of the dwellings. The proposed dwellings would be orientated in an east-west layout in a terraced form, set back a minimum of 7.15 metres from Taylor Court, and there is also no front fencing proposed. Adjacent to the access way, the common property access way, along the western side of the site, would be a proposed landscaped area which would measure 6 metres in width. And that landscaped area would continue from the street frontage all the way through to the site's rear boundary. Proposed development would provide a contemporary design response. It incorporate cuboid built forms with a combination of flat and shallow pitched roofs. It would also incorporate external facing materials evident in the surrounding area, such as rendered surfaces and weatherboard cladding. There are no walls on boundaries proposed, and the proposal does not include any reduction in car parking for either private or visitor car parking spaces. In fact, expanding on that, the development actually exceeds the on-site car parking requirements contained within the planning scheme. In terms of referrals, the application has been referred to internal council units and to relevant external utility servicing authorities. No objection to the grant of a permit has been received from internal council departments, and no objection to the grant of a permit has been received from external servicing authorities either. The public has been notified of the application through letters sent to adjoining owners and occupiers, and a notification sign at the site's frontage within Taylor Court. 28 letters were received objecting to the application. However, it is noted that some of these were duplicate or follow-up letters as well. The matters raised within those objections relate to neighbourhood character, dwelling density, overloading of existing services, including stormwater, electricity, gas and sewer, negative impacts on residential amenity of neighbouring dwellings, increased traffic congestion and car parking demand, flooding, loss of biodiversity value, proposed fencing detail, construction management and devaluation of property. There was no consultation meeting held, obviously due to the number of objections received and the inability for groups of people to meet during the coronavirus pandemic. The applicant instead provided a written response which was circulated to submitters. On the back of that written response, there were no objections withdrawn. So the application's been assessed against the relevant planning policy, zone overlay and particular and general provisions within the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme. The proximity of Taylor Court to the neighbourhood centre supports a higher density of development within the street than what has occurred to date. It's a well-serviced street and in close proximity to retail, education, recreation areas, and has decent access to public transport. The proposed development accords with the specific objectives of the scheme in this regard by proposing a residential development that increases the density and the diversity of housing on a large site close to the activity centre of Highton. The proposed building height, bulk, form and external materials are considered to provide an appropriate design response based on the relevant policy considerations and the evidently evolving character of the surrounding locality, which is designated as an increased housing diversity area. The proposal is consistent with the intent expressed in relevant planning policy to support the evolution towards more intensive development with visually interesting built forms. The design response also accords with the purpose of the zoning of the site in this regard, being the residential growth zone, in order to provide dwellings at increased densities and diversity. As the applicant has appealed to VCAT for review of the failure to determine the application within the prescribed timeframes, it's recommended that the council advocate to VCAT that it grant a planning permit for the construction of 9 dwellings and 9 lot subdivision at the subject site, subject to the conditions as contained within the officer report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muston. Any councillors have any questions or queries they wish to ask? I have no questions or queries. Councillor Nelson, then Councillor Harwood.
I'll let Councillor Harwood go first. That's fine. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Muston, what is the reason for council's failure to determine? Is that because of the high water that actually runs through that specific area?
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. So the assessment process took longer than the statutory timeframe. The reason being was that there were numerous discussions held with the council officers, particularly the council's SBO team and the applicants, in order to arrive at a position where the council's SBO officers were satisfied with the proposals.
Yeah, I've got a few questions, so I'll keep going if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair. And did you mention that number 4 Taylor Court shares a driveway already? Is that correct?
Yes, there's a double crossover. It doesn't share a driveway with number 5, I don't believe, but there is a double crossover from Taylor Court, which is shared with number 5.
And does it say how many? I couldn't see where it says how many trees will be removed, because I know that's a quite treed area. Does it say how many trees will be removed?
Yes. So on the subject site, there's 39 existing trees. This application was submitted, supported by an arboricultural impact assessment prepared by a level 5 arborist. So that assessment has gone through all of the trees on site and also the trees on neighbouring sites, which were considered in close proximity to the site's boundaries. That assessment has identified that 3 of the existing trees on the site are of a high retention value. The rest are all either medium or low retention value. The development itself proposes to retain 1 of those trees out of the 39 existing trees on site. The 2, that one is within the rear garden of proposed dwelling 7.
So it's going to remove 38 of the 39 trees.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, and it slopes from front to back upwards because of Elsburn at the back there in Belmont. Did we have any objections from people in Elsburn? Did we? Because they will lose they could potentially lose their light in the back street there in Elsburn.
So the site slopes from its southeastern corner down towards its northwestern corner.
Yeah.
There were some objections received from owners or occupants within Elsburn to the east. However, the application is also supported by shadow diagrams showing that at the prescribed date within the scheme, which is September 22nd, that those properties would not result in an unacceptable loss of access to sunlight in accordance with the scheme. So the development complies with the requirements of the scheme in that regard.
Thanks, Lewis, I'm well aware with that the summer solstice and the winter solstice and where council draws that 22 September. And also car parking. You said it has more car parks than is needed. Now, I know Taylor Court quite intimately, and I know that you cannot park a car on Taylor Court. So if there's a visitor, how many visitor car parks are there for number 4?
So as part of this development, Councillor Nelson, there's a proposed 2 visitor car parking spaces. In that regard, the requirement for a 9-dwelling development is for 1 visitor car parking space. So they are exceeding the requirements of the planning scheme in that regard.
So perhaps needs to change. That's what I'm getting at, because Taylor Court is probably not even 6 metres wide. You can only just get 1 car down there, and there are no standing signs all the way along Taylor Court, even for bin day from recollection. So I'm concerned that allowing 1 person to visit per 9 units is yes, that's the standard, but perhaps the standard needs to be changed. I'll reserve my right for other councillors to speak now. Thanks, Lewis.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. Lewis, was there a mediation session between the applicant and the objectors?
There wasn't a meeting held. The applicant provided a written response to objections, which was circulated to the people that did submit objections. Other than that, although it was inviting further discussions, there were no further discussions that were held.
All right. So the objective wouldn't sit down with the applicants and hear some of their concerns firsthand. And I guess my discussions with the objectors are they're not against development on the block. At this particular point, it's purely the scale and the bulk and the number of units that they're actually really objecting to. In relation to the actual drop of the block, just for the other councillors, could you just give the actual depth of the drop of the block, just to try and put some context of how steep this block is?
I certainly can. If you'll just bear with me, Councillor Harwood, I'll just look at the plans. So the site slopes, as I mentioned before, from the southeastern corner, where it has a ground level of approximately 20 metres on the Australian height datum, and it slopes down to its northwestern, I should say, corner, where it is about 13 metres on the Australian height datum. So that would be a fall of approximately 7 metres.
Thank you. That is a substantial drop on a block of land. 7 metres over not a big distance overall. And I think the issue here again is in relation to the capture of the stormwater, and even as Councillor Nelson has alluded to, the removal of the trees, the number of trees, which actually gives security to the ground to hold groundwater, and also obviously to the amenity of the block and the area, is also what has caused concern for some of the objectors. And also, like Councillor Nelson, I'm more than aware of Taylor Court and how tight it is. It is actually a very small court, and that's why there is no parking allowed in most of it, because it doesn't have that capacity. So to think we would put 9 dwellings on 1 block, yes, it's a large block, agreed. 9 dwellings on 1 block would almost double the existing number of residents in that court. If you take that kind of theory, like wherever you might be in and around these developed areas or commercial areas, to double the size of the residents in a space is huge. And I think the residents in this case are rightly concerned and have rightly objected. And also, neighbouring residents have also expressed concern about the scale of this particular proposed development. So I'll just leave those comments there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Yeah, Councillor Manane, please.
Thank you. Well, my questions are in part being covered. I just want to clarify a couple of things. Two questions with respect to the trees. Are we saying that of the 39 trees, they're retaining one, but they're actually taking away 2 of the trees that were considered to have high retention value?
That's correct, Councillor Manane. I'll just probably expand on that a little bit as well. So there have been 3 trees that were identified as high retention value by a level 5 arborist. 2 of those are proposed to be removed. In saying that, and this can be referred to on page 48 of the officer report as well, in response to some of the objections raised. There is actually no planning control in place which prevents the removal of vegetation from the subject site. So whether this application were supported or not would have no bearing on the landowner's decision to retain or remove existing trees from the site. But what I suppose, in terms of our assessment, what it does do is, as an application, is it provides an opportunity to incorporate conditions as part of a planning permit to provide an appropriate landscape proposal, which is required to be completed and maintained. The application was supported by a landscape plan, which demonstrated that a significant level of planting and landscaping is achievable on site. But further to this, we've actually suggested or recommended a condition for a revised landscape plan, which also utilises local Indigenous species as well.
And I see also, with respect to the trees, Lewis, there was a requirement that trees actually owned by third parties adjoining properties, any trees within 4 metres of the subject land had to be protected as well. Would that present an issue? Is that going to be something we're going to be able to handle?
Yes, it would, Councillor Manane. So that's correct. The trees on neighbouring sites would be required to be protected. The submitted arboricultural impact assessment determined that the proposal would not have a negative effect on trees on neighbouring sites. That arboricultural impact assessment has also been referred to the Council's Parks Department, and they've actually corroborated that in confirming that the trees on neighbouring sites would be able to be sufficiently protected.
Okay. Just on a different issue now, I noticed that the applicant's required to pay a 5% payment in lieu of private open space. Is this a normal requirement, or is this because he's providing less than the required private open space?
No, that's a normal requirement, Councillor. Under clause 53.01 of the planning scheme, an application to subdivide land for 2 to 9 lots requires a 1% contribution per lot, up to a maximum of 5%.
Okay, so the amount of public open space in this proposal is within guidelines.
Correct. Yeah. So it's secured as a financial contribution, and that's 5% in accordance with clause 53.01 of the scheme.
And with respect to the point that the other councillors were making about cars, in reading the application, I noticed that they've allocated 2 car parks to each of the 9 units, and a further 2 car parks for parking. So at its maximum, potentially we could have 20 cars parked in this allotment and coming in and out this driveway into the court.
Yes, quite possibly, Councillor. So the requirement, as we mentioned previously, for a development of this scale is for one visitor car parking space. They're actually providing two. For the proposed dwellings, because they're 3-bedroom dwellings, they each require 2 on-site car parking spaces, and they've been provided with those 2, so that would be a total of 20 on-site parking spaces. But with regards to Taylor Court, it's worth noting that Taylor Court would meet the classification of an access place within, which is defined within clause 56.06 of the scheme. An access place is a minor street providing local residential access with a shared traffic, pedestrian and recreation use, but with pedestrian priority. So in clause 56.06-8, access place is identified to have an indicative maximum traffic volume for a 24-hour period of 300 to 1,000 vehicles per day. So the provision in our assessment would determine that the provision of 9 dwellings with 18 private parking spaces and 2 visitor parking spaces would be likely to have a nominal impact on those types of traffic numbers.
I don't think that's the. I think the fear of the local residents is a bit more heightened than that, but notwithstanding the fact that I'm not querying your assessment, but in the conversations that with residents, they're concerned about, I guess it's the point that Councillor Harwood made about the overdevelopment and the doubling the residents. You got 20 cars coming in and out off a block that previously had 2 cars coming in and out. So I think that's part of the concern. And just my last question, if I could you just explain, is it a fear or reality, the possibility of overloading of existing services?
I suppose, at this stage, Councillor Mayne, all I can really speak to is this proposal, and this proposal has been assessed by the servicing authorities, and no objection has been raised with regards to overloading existing services.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manane. Councillor Harwood again.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Just a couple of things I want to just go over again. And it is in relation to the access of Taylor Court. There is only one way in and one way out. This is, as I said earlier, we're potentially almost doubling the number of residents in the court, yet there's still only a very narrow entry-exit point to this court. And we're talking about a site that would have potentially 18 vehicles parked on site in supposedly 18, in the 2-car garages of the dwellings. There's no way everyone's going to park their car in their garages. Garages are full of, gym equipment or storage, or you might put 1 car in there, but you will have, 9+ cars parked in and around that particular site, and they will park on the street and they will park in the visitors car park, because there is no way they will all just park 2 cars in their garage. So I don't accept that. And from memory, there's no footpath actually up Taylor Court, so that also will no doubt become an issue if we almost double the number of people living in the court, and without knowing what the demographic is, but that has every opportunity to become another issue of that area. And councillors today are more than cognizant of the need for higher density in and around designated areas. We get that. But in this case, no development should have a detrimental effect to the existing character and amenity of a neighbourhood. And I think people, live in particular areas for particular reasons. I just think on this occasion, this would have a very strong effect on the character and the amenity of Taylor Court by almost doubling the size of the residents and activity in and around it. Thank you.
You're on mute, Councillor Trent.
My apologies. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. Councillor Harwood brings up a very good point, which I failed to articulate. But every single dwelling has only one garage, and then the other car is parked on the space in a tandem way. So they are very, very small single garages where everyone will put their stuff, as people do. And then they'll only leave one car space, which means all the other car spaces will be parked on the street illegally. So I'm very concerned about congestion. And yes, we've heard from council officers say that these are within state planning regulations, but this is Geelong and this is Highton. And yes, these are rules for the whole of the state, but I think they should be reworked to be certain places of Melbourne and not stretch out to places like Geelong. We live in Geelong because we want to, and because we love Geelong, and we live in Highton because we love the amenity. And removing 38 of 39 trees, Highton's known for its trees. I'm really concerned about the removal of trees, and I'm really concerned about the massive amount of car parking that's going to take place in and around one of the busiest shopping strips in Highton. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Do you have any questions or queries from any other panel members? Thank you. With no further questions or queries, I will call for a recommendation from the panel. Do we have a mover of any recommendation? Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be moving an alternative recommendation as opposed to one that's been proposed by the officers at this point.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Nelson. Thank you. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. Look, would you like me to read the alternate out, or are you happy with the that you have a copy of it at this point? There's 5 points in the alternate recommendation. It'll only take a few minutes if that's okay.
I believe a quick summary, as you wish.
All right. Quite simply, the alternate recommendation for Taylor Court, that the responsible authority, having considered all the matters which the Planning and Environment Act 1987 requires it to consider, recommends to VCAT to refuse to grant a planning permit to the construction of 9 dwellings and 9-lot subdivision at 4 Taylor Court, Highton. The following grounds, as we've basically discussed in relation to housing diversity insofar as development is repetitive in its approach and doesn't provide a reasonable degree of various housing choice. We've touched on some traffic and amenity and character issues. It's not consistent with clause 3207, which is the residential growth zone, to encourage a scale of development that provides a transition between areas of more intensive use and development and other residential areas. The proposal is considered to be quite monotonous and unrelenting in its design approach. The proposal is insufficiently responsive to the objectives and or standards of clause 55, including, as touched on, neighbourhood character objective, energy efficiency objectives, safety objective, access objective, dwelling entry objective, and design detail objective. So the proposal is not consistent with clause 65 of the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme, including the orderly planning of the area, the effective amenity of the area, and the density of the proposed development. So succinctly, Chair, I don't support it going through. I support the alternate where we refuse the planning permit on those grounds, and I think it would have a very serious detrimental effect to the neighbourhood character and amenity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be pretty quick. The reason that council was that failed to determine a response by the designated timeframe was because of the massive flood issues that this block actually is subjected to. As Councillor Harwood well knows, this is what was the Kidney Creek, which goes down to the Barwon River, which our ward is named after. This is smack bang in the middle of Kidney Creek. And this is why we took so long to make sure that the council got their figures right. So I think that's a problem in itself. It's also 9 dwellings on this is actually, each dwelling is 151 square metres. I live in Highton and I wouldn't want to live on 151 square metres. I don't think that's right. It's not in keeping with the amenity. I think getting rid of 38 of 39 trees is appalling. I never thought I would be voting for the non-removal of trees, but here we are in 2020. 38 or 39 trees is just a disgrace. That should never be allowed. Loss of amenity, we've all talked about that. Doubling, as Councillor Harwood said, doubling the amount of traffic in and out of Taylor Court into one of the most busy shopping strips in Highton is just not acceptable. People live in Highton because of the amenity, and removing that or making it worse will just have a massive detriment to the Highton Village Shopping Centre. And that's something that as a councillor and Highton resident will not stand for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Do any of the councillors wish to speak? Councillor Murnane. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I won't go over all of the points that both Councillor Harwood and Councillor Nelson have put forward in their motion and also in previous discussion, but I would just like to add my voice to the inappropriateness of the scale of this. I think, as was said before, it is a large block, and I think we can come up with a more suitable development to make sure that we do take advantage of the opportunity to have some sort of medium density to enhance the shopping centre, but it needs to be of a different scale to what's been presented here. I think as somebody who's lived in the Highton area for 30 years, as the other guys have mentioned, one of the real pleasant things about going to Highton Shopping Centre is the trees. You go down there, it has just got that beautiful warm feel about it, and to be taking away trees that have a high retention value is bad enough, but to be taking away all but one tree of a very beautiful part of the centre is not what we want to see. I'm sure we can come up with a plan that helps to preserve what the true character of Highton is. There are some serious issues around traffic that need to be addressed. So I would like to support both the motion and the second. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murnane. Any other councillors wish to speak on the matter? Councillor Aiken, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Look, I'll actually be extremely brief and just say that, look, I have a principle of actually being guided very much by the local ward councillors when you have a planning matter such as this, and I've been consistent on that over the last 3 years while I've been on the council, and I don't think there's actually been one example where I've disagreed with what the majority of the local ward councillors have actually said. So I'm proud of that principle that I have, and I see no reason again tonight to not adhere to that because the 3 local ward councillors have actually presented significantly local knowledge and understanding of the impacts of this particular planning application, and as a consequence I'm quite happy to use my vote as a responsible councillor to be supporting the alternative recommendation that's been put for us tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Aiken. If there's no further queries or statements, I put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? The recommendation is passed.
Throw the alternate recommendation, Mr.
Sorry,
Chair.
I apologise. I put the alternate recommendation to the vote. Is what I meant. I stand corrected. I had that note in the minutes that the vote was in favour of the alternative recommendation. Thank you. With that being passed, the alternate recommendation is being passed. I'll call close to the Planning Committee meeting 210. I thank my fellow panel members for being here this evening. Thank you to all the officers present as well. And to all those watching at home, I apologise for the earlier technical difficulties. We got there in the end. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.